Welcome to the Trial Site News Podcast series. Today we'll be talking with Ralph Passarella of Reify Health and Ivor Clarke of SubjectWell to discuss their partnership. Now, SubjectWell provides risk-free patient recruitment for clinical trials. Unlike traditional approaches to recruiting, which are study, site, and disease specific, SubjectWell's technology continuously recruits nationwide, informing and educating patients about clinical trials in general. Now, Reify Health provides cloud-based software that accelerates development of new and life-saving therapies. They serve the global life science industry, including thousands of clinical research sites, the most innovative biotechs, and the world's largest biopharmaceutical companies. So, gentlemen, welcome.
Adrian, great to be here.
Now, can you both share with us some of the core challenges with finding research participants?
Yeah, I can dive in on this. The biggest challenge to finding participants for clinical trials is that most people, certainly pre-COVID, didn't even know that clinical trials exist. Even if they do, absolutely don't know how to get started. And so the challenge is that there's a whole need to build awareness about trials, about the opportunities for participation. But ultimately, it's actually to hold patients' hands through that entire process. And SubjectWell is sort of at the front end of this, where we are going and focused on awareness building, engagement, as you said, finding people when they're not even necessarily thinking about their health, and then holding their hands through that process of screening and engagement. And the partnership with Reify is so exciting for us because, it's not just about that initial engagement, it's about getting patients all the way actually into the trials and randomized into the trials. And that happens past even what we do, but when the research coordinators get involved and actually need to get patients screened, consented, enrolled, and randomized.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times when people talk about challenges associated with recruiting and enrolling patients, they think about some of the things that Ivor just outlined, and then there isn't as much discussion about what happens after patients have been identified and sort of initially pre-screened. And I think there are a whole set of challenges that in some ways we as an industry are responsible for creating. We've asked research coordinators to do more and more work. Their workloads, in addition to being responsible for recruiting and enrolling patients, they're responsible for conducting all of the visits for patients that are enrolled, right? And making sure so much of that work happens effectively. And so what we haven't done is provide them with tools or kind of more optimized workflows to allow them to keep up with all of this work that we're asking them to do. And so there are a lot of potentially qualified or eligible patients that ultimately don't go on to enroll in a study because the research coordinator has too much on his or her plate, or they aren't able to do 3,000 things in one day. They can only do 2,999. And so I think there are a lot of kind of workflow and workload issues as well at sites that we can really aim to alleviate.
Now, patient recruitment has been a challenge now for decades, but it gets more challenging with more complex protocols, move to precision medicine, focus on specialized therapies, so on and so forth. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on exactly those key points, right? Increased complexity in trials creates two challenges. One is it just makes it harder to find patients as the specificity in the IE criteria for a protocol gets sort of ever more narrow, as well as it's just an increased both regulatory burden and screening burden on all the sites for these increasingly complex protocols. And so what that inevitably leads to is sites increasingly need to look beyond their own patient populations in order to find enough participants for a study. And again, it comes back to the first question you asked when we were talking about it is you need to go build awareness, right? You need to engage patients outside of a site's practice or a site's sort of built-in patient population. But then you also need to actually make it easy for sites to continuously engage patients through that process to screen them and get them in.
And I think we also see it at the level of individual sites. The workload or the number of studies that a given coordinator can manage at once. You can poll different sites. It has dropped from maybe 4 or 5 studies to 1.5, 2 studies at once max. Rightly so. Now that we can more kind of surgically target, subpopulations of patients with kind of more targeted and hopefully more effective treatments, that's a great advancement. As we go farther and farther down that path, though, we need to really evaluate the infrastructure that we've relied on to run clinical trials and make sure that the things that we ask research coordinators and site staff, investigators, sub-investigators to do are things that they're actually capable of doing. And so I think the protocol complexity has gone up, and it's contributed to enrollment challenges, not just by some of the things that Ivor outlined there, but also by to kind of underline what I said earlier. It really has kind of increased the workload and demands placed on site staff. And again, there are things we can do about it, and we need to.
So, how does a research sponsor or trial site find the right engaged participants if they are not part of the practice?
Yeah, and there are a wide variety of options out there, but in the end, and keep hearing me come back to this term about awareness and engagement building, right? It's like the whole idea is that you need to find patients who aren't necessarily otherwise looking, and that if the industry keeps relying on finding patients who are already engaged with the healthcare system, you keep finding the same narrow pool of people. And, not only does that pose challenges from sort of diversity and enrollment timeline perspectives, it also just means you're not able to go bring clinical trials as a treatment option to a wider population. And so, people ultimately are interested in participating in clinical trials when they're presented with them as an option, but people aren't looking. People are more likely to be Googling clock repair than they are to be Googling clinical trials. And so we as an industry, and SubjectWell in particular, is focused on how do we go broaden awareness to increase access, and then make sure the infrastructure is in place to actually nurture that engagement when you're finding new people. And SubjectWell is the front end of that funnel, where we can go get patients on the phone, screen them for multiple studies, find the one that's the right fit for the patient. But then what we're left with is, okay, great, we've got an engaged patient. How do we keep that engagement up? And that is very much at the core of the problem that both SubjectWell and Reify are trying to solve, and that we can go identify those patients and start that engagement. But then we need to make sure that the right tools exist for the research staff to actually keep those patients engaged all the way to the point of randomization.
Could you share with us how the two partnership solutions work together?
So something I think everybody, all 3 of us here, and anyone probably who listens to this podcast will know, it is complex to run any one clinical trial. It takes a large number of people, different parties, companies, individuals to actually do it successfully. So we as partners are very aware of that. And the things that Ivor and his team focus on at SubjectWell are really around increasing patient awareness, doing a very good job of engaging potentially enrollable patients, interested patients, and then making a handoff to the research sites and site staff that can kind of take it from there. And we as a company at Reify Health, we've really focused on understanding the site workflow, understanding the kinds of challenges that site staff face actually running studies, and using technology to kind of help them do their job better, to make it easier for them to run the studies they're running, to share information back with sponsors. And this partnership really extends some of those core principles to incorporating or sort of engaging the referrals that SubjectWell is making to sites more effectively. And so instead of SubjectWell referring patients to a site through some means that a site might not be familiar with. We've integrated our workflows, the SubjectWell and Reify Health workflows, so that patients referred by SubjectWell to sites actually are referred into our study team platform. So the study team technology platform is our product at Reify Health. And so a research site now, kind of a research coordinator, can show up to work, log into study team, and referrals from SubjectWell are sitting kind of in their inbox right alongside all of the other patients that they're recruiting, that they're considering, that they're working with in that study. And I'll let Ivor kind of elaborate on some of the benefits we see there too, and go into more detail maybe about some of the workflow.
Yeah, look, sites, anyone working at a site will talk to you about the frustration they have about the number of different tools that they have to use in order to get their job done. And for us, patient engagement is not, at least from our perspective, and bringing patients into this system, it's not about adding new tools. It's about adding patients and then making it as easy as possible for the sites to go engage with those patients. And what we saw with Reify was the chance to go partner with someone building a best of breed tool for a site experience. And the real extension of that is it's a best of breed experience for the patient as well.
Can you share some examples of case studies where this joint approach helps accelerate research?
And so I think in the press release that we put out together, we mentioned some of the work we've done with Lilly. That we're working with other sponsors as well in a similar capacity. We've really focused kind of first and foremost on optimizing the patient journey and sort of the workflow at the site to support that, as SubjectWell hands patients, refers patients to sites. And we're going to be doing work. We are actively working to analyze the impact of that. There are a lot of opportunities kind of throughout this process that we're partnering to optimize, to really kind of improve each of those steps, and ultimately that will lead to higher throughput overall, an overall increase in enrollment. And I think, Ivor, you can maybe speak to some of the specific challenges even that you guys have seen at SubjectWell over the years, and how kind of the integration we put in place aims to solve it.
Yeah, and more than anything else, it's about how we sort of take all the scale that's necessary to deliver patients into sites, and then again, not overwhelming sites in that process. And as Ralph was just speaking to it, it's no one company is going to solve this problem or solve any of these problems. And we saw the opportunity in partnering with Reify to go really hold up an example of what kind of some of these partnerships and integrations can look like to build out an ecosystem that creates better experiences for patients and better experiences for the sites.
Yeah, and so I think from the perspective of a patient now, as like in this case, SubjectWell would typically do, and still they do a lot of work to understand, well, is this patient potentially eligible? Are they somebody who's genuinely interested in participating in the study? They make a handoff to sites. Typically, you would have to log into a separate portal, make sure you caught the email notification that you just received. As a research coordinator, you get all of the same information you would get from SubjectWell, and potentially from other referral partners as well in the ecosystem. And you get that information exactly where you're already managing your existing patients. And so the benefits that come from that, one, we know patients that if individual sites do not follow up with patients quickly enough, within 48 to 72 hours, patients will lose interest. And so all that work that SubjectWell did up front, in some ways is for naught. And so by making the information highly accessible to the site, you increase the likelihood that they follow up with patients quickly. We also know that handoff can sort of be plagued with information loss, and it's really hard for site staff to stay on top of all of the different patients that need follow-up. It's hard for sponsors and for SubjectWell to know, well, what happened to all of the patients that we referred to these sites. And so one of the things that we're able to do with this integration is actually have kind of end-to-end traceability, from the moment a patient first comes in contact with SubjectWell's kind of online material or presence, all the way through to when a patient is randomized into the study. And so now what we're able to do, in partnership with the sponsors we work with and with SubjectWell, is really say, well, what exactly is working? What are the things that we can do to more effectively spend the recruitment enrollment, dollars that sponsors have allocated to studies? How do we really optimize this work that we're doing because we have this kind of traceability and invisibility too?
The last thing I just want to even touch on, Ralph, that you reminded me of is sometimes it's even just about the little things. You talk about, information not getting lost. It's also about information availability. So lots of what we do are warm transfers to the site. So we finish our phone conversation with a patient, and then we connect the patient directly to the research site. Well, in this particular case, the research site's using study teams. It means that when they pick up the phone, all of the information that SubjectWell has collected about a patient is already available to the study coordinator. And that just makes everyone's experience much better. And so, those types of improvements can also just make this work so much better.
I think we see this manifesting itself in, again, quicker follow-up by site staff, better visibility into overall data and decision making, and then also there's some synergy I think that we are seeing here between our two companies even, because we're making it easier for sites, and so we expect over time to actually, we're hearing this anecdotally from sites now, but sites maybe that would be on the fence about participating in a recruitment or referral campaign because they're already using study team, and the referrals will just be in the place where they're already working. And we also expect to kind of at scale see increased utilization of some of these programs too, which is a big win for patients and for sponsors too.
What are the biggest challenges for trial sites to find and retain participants for studies?
Fundamentally, it's, and I apologize, Adrian, I'm going to keep coming back to the same terms. I'm going to say awareness and engagement. And look, both of those are coupled both with each other. And you mentioned trust, which is another component. And there's a real correlation between that engagement and trust piece. In general, people who are more engaged with with the health system tend to be more trustful of it. But one of the things, it's a really maybe not surprising, but funny result is you frequently see that patients will say that they are not particularly trustful of the healthcare system in general, but they trust their provider. The problem is most people's providers are not talking to them about clinical trials as a care option. And so what we need to do is figure out how do we kind of go leverage the latent interest that we know exists, focus on building awareness, and then create engagement in a way that builds trust or kind of leverages the bit of trust they have. I mean, look, only 4% of the US population has ever participated in a clinical trial. And so there's a huge opportunity. You don't need to go solve trust for the entire 96%, but you can go engage that 96%, and you'll find that a really healthy portion of that population is interested if you can offer them the tools to make it easy, right? Consumers come in with really small amounts of information, not knowing how to navigate it. I liken to it's like trying to book international travel 50 years ago, right? It's like, people wouldn't know what these countries are, let alone what the airlines are. There's and that's why travel agents existed, right? It's this concierge, high touch approach. And look, the metaphor breaks down if you go too far with it, but that idea of, giving people access to people to help guide them through this process is just incredibly helpful at both establishing trust and allowing people to navigate it.
And I think the access and engagement kind of top line points can be extended to research site staff and to also to the healthcare institutions where they work as well. So just a really quick to reiterate kind of what we do at Reify Health. The study team platform, there's a product that sponsors use, separate product that each individual site uses, it stays with the site across trials. So it's not dependent on a sponsor using study team for a site to actually begin use it across all their studies as their patient management system, the place where they manage the research work that they are doing. That's important as it relates to this kind of access and engagement topic, because we also see that right now, maybe 3% of physicians in the US participate in clinical research in some capacity. Globally, it's much lower than 3%. And when you actually go to a research site, especially one that is, a larger hospital or academic medical center, really often the research staff, the research team kind of works in a silo within the healthcare, institution or entity. Part of what we are doing at Reify Health is building this kind of technological backbone or infrastructure that allows sponsors to bring their clinical trials to life in more parts of the healthcare system. And so if you're a research coordinator, you're actually dependent on other physicians to refer patients to you, even within your own institution. It's actually quite hard to get information about trials into the hands of or minds of other physicians that are seeing patients every single day. And so there's a lot of work that we're also doing to increase access to trial information within healthcare systems and increase engagement among physicians and other healthcare professional staff at these institutions so that more patients are informed about research as well. And so I do think access and engagement, you can extend that kind of into looking at research sites too, and some of the challenges they face.
Yeah.
Now, for our audience, those that want to learn more about your partnership between Reify and SubjectWell, how does business look like today?
Yeah, and Ivor, maybe.
I mean, fantastic, and not just on the backs of this partnership. Look, I think what we're seeing right now in the industry is, as much as anything else, kind of driven by some macro level trends, right? Q1 is when most sponsors really said, okay, think we understand what's going on with the pandemic. And we want to go figure out how we restart our entire portfolio and go really accelerate trials that have been in the planning pipeline. And so we've seen just an explosion of activity and interest. And fundamentally, the problems that we're mutually trying to solve with Reify are cut to the core of what sponsors need, right? I mean, patient recruitment is the biggest bottleneck in the drug development pipeline. And the costs of delays are just astronomical. And so, everyone had a pretty tough year with COVID. And so the beginning of this year, I think, has been that kind of real acceleration across the board as everyone tries to get trials going again.
I think we see a lot of the same stuff. I think in the last year, we've experienced some really incredible growth at Reify Health. Overall. And I think that one really encouraging kind of macro level trend to maybe add to some of what Ivor was saying there that we're seeing too, sponsors, as a result of the pandemic, sponsors in the industry at large have really looked at solutions for making clinical research more accessible to patients in broader geographies, making it possible for more healthcare professionals to participate. Doing that is going to require technologies like what SubjectWell has built and companies like what SubjectWell does, technologies like what we've built. And so I think that there's this really exciting macro level trend that benefits our two companies and others as well, but also most importantly, really benefits patients, the people who need us to do a better job and need us to run these trials, get them closed, completed more efficiently, more consistently.
What kind of trial sites do you work with?
Yeah, so all of them is the really simple answer to that question. So we definitely work with any number of sites, and I think speaking for us specifically, we're now available in over 100 countries. So we have sites really kind of distributed across the globe, and we really focused on understanding what are some of the more fundamental issues that exist across sites, but then also really kind of creating either geography specific, region specific experiences or site type specific user experiences to really help. On one study, you maybe have 100 different sites that each of them in some ways looks very similar, but each of them in many ways also looks very distinct from one another. And so that has been a big effort on our part, is to really kind of tailor to some of the needs, the various needs of sites, not just in the US, but around the world too.
Now, finally, before I let you guys go today, any other information or wisdom you'd like? Now, before I let you guys go today, anything you'd like to share with the audience?
So maybe two things that we haven't touched on that I think are important to share here. One thing, and to again sort of zoom out and look at what the partnership is doing, what Reify Health and SubjectWell are doing. SubjectWell has been a really incredible partner for us and from our perspective, because we have very complementary things that we do well and that we focus on doing well. But also they've come into the partnership realizing that they are not here to do everything. They're not here to solve every problem, and that we can create value for both of our companies, but for the ecosystem at large too, when we work together. And so to that end, I think what we're trying to set up at Reify Health is very much an ecosystem of companies that are doing work to identify patients and refer them to sites. Set up an ecosystem where sites can go to one place and engage with those different patient referrals and patient populations. So to the extent that there are other, that is a very active area of investment for us. The company is continuing to double down on these kinds of partnerships. And so that's one sort of like big picture thought that I think is really important for listeners to hear is, we have to really make change here. We are going to have to work together sincerely and effectively to see the kind of evolution we need to see. The second thing, and then I will let you jump in here. I think we, in the last year, we've gone through, a number of changes. As a society, we've gone through a number of experiences for the first time. One thing that we've emphasized over and over internally at Reify Health to the team, the kind of feeling that we all had in June, July, August of 2020, waiting on vaccine trials to enroll, COVID treatment trials to enroll, to see the results, that kind of waiting, that's the same kind of waiting that patients with Crohn's disease, metastatic breast cancer, Alzheimer's disease do every single day. And so I think that it's really important that we all move forward as an industry and as a society and appreciate how important clinical development is, how important clinical trials are, and just what it feels like to be waiting on trials to enroll. Because that's the same kind of feeling that so many millions of people have already. We just weren't quite able to have the same level of empathy maybe that we can now. And so that's hopefully that's a takeaway as well for our society. And when we think about the life sciences industry and what we're doing here in clinical development.
I can't possibly say that better than Ralph, so I'm not going to try.